Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History is Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And we're streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where those videos are available to watch anytime afterwards. And if you've not already done so, please silence your cell phones. Solidarity Now, the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, is open upstairs. The traveling exhibit explores that pivotal grassroots movement and examines the 6-week protest community that formed in Washington, D.C. as a part of it. At a free gallery talk tomorrow at 11 a.m., museum educator Drew Gardner will discuss ways the Poor People's Campaign brought national attention to the problems of poverty and hunger. And dietitian Rebecca Butts will talk about how the University of Mississippi Medical Center Evers Care Clinic, where she is employed and which is named for civil rights leader Myrlie Evers, works to improve patients' health by addressing such social needs as food insecurity. So that's tomorrow at 11 upstairs. It's free, and I hope that we'll see you for that. And then I hope that you'll join us next week for History's Lunch when Heather Denny will present Complex Compromises, the life and legacy of Dr. Jacob L. Reddix. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Elizabeth Bronwyn Boyd to present Southern Beauty from Pageantry to Bama Rush. Jackson native Elizabeth Bronwyn Boyd earned her BA in Journalism, Broadcasting, and Film from Trinity University, her MA in Southern Studies from the University of Mississippi, and her PhD in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. She has served on the faculties of Vanderbilt University, the University of Mississippi, and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she appeared in the 2023 HBO Max documentary, Bama Rush. Boyd's book, Southern Beauty, Race, Ritual, and Memory in the Modern South was published by the University of Georgia Press in 2022. Help me welcome Elizabeth Boyd.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you to Mississippi Archives and History and the 2 Mississippi museums for having me back in my hometown. It's a pleasure to be here. So I've entitled my talk, Rituals of Race and Region from Pageantry to Bama Rush. Has anybody heard of Bama Rush? Has anybody heard of Bama Rush Talk? Yeah? Rush Talk? Have you got a TikTok account? Last summer in 2022, Bama Rush Talk opened its second season. In 2021, Bama Rush Talk, as they referred to these TikToks of young potential new members, formerly known as Rushies, had created a viral sensation on TikTok of this scene. And so last summer was what they call the second season. It was essentially a reality television show happening in real time, with potential new members flooding TikTok with views of their OOTDs. Who knows what that is? Outfit of the day, very good. In which the PNMs reeled off the brands that they were sporting from head to toe. I will refrain from actually doing an OOTD, but I might be able to persuade it to do one later. And the last summer's It Girl emerged as Kylan Darnell. This is Kylan, who actually is a pageant girl from Ohio. And Kylan shared and overshared, personally, in my opinion, her OOTDs, much of which included merch shipped to her by luxury brands. So there was this display that she really excelled at this format and this platform, but this display of over-the-top wealth of Gucci, Chanel, Tiffany, and middle-aged viewers on TikTok and former sorority members were captivated by the entire scene and made their own TikToks in response, fully admitting that they were obsessed by Bama Rush and demanding more OOTDs. Internationally, especially British viewers, expressed their complete bafflement at the scene. It was so unlike that found at their own universities. And so watching these TikToks and these OOTDs became this online anthropological field trip, and not one they were particularly equipped to interpret. A statistician created a leaderboard to track the PE&M's rankings and social media engagement growth, and it was updated in real time. You could look it up and look up your favorite player, essentially, whether it was Kylan or whomever, and keep up with their status and their rankings. As one commenter on TikTok said, "Who needs reality TV when we have Bama Rush?" Grant Sykes, a non-binary student going through Rush, garnered a lot of followers. This is Grant. But they were cut from every house before pref night because, as one commenter said, Alabama's just not ready for that. Others came out in support of Grant, and they had big campaigns online, justice for Grant. But a trans or non-binary sorority member was not all that Alabama was not ready for. They were so thin, so rich, so blonde. They looked so much alike, and no wonder so much of their apparel had been purchased at a Tuscaloosa retailer called the Pants Store. As one TikTok commentator noted, "Whoa, looks like Bama forgot to desegregate." Professor Jess Maddox, who is a professor of media studies and digital culture at Alabama, went online quickly to comment and noted that with upwards of 42% of students from Alabama, with the rest of the student body coming from elsewhere in the US and 92 foreign countries, most of what was going on here was a huge performance of white Southernness. Now, sorority rush is a feminine stratification ritual that's performed each year at scores of college campuses across the country. It consists of a series of increasingly selective get-acquainted parties. Rush is a proving ground of competitive femininity cloaked in the guise of hospitality and collegiate spirit. It may look like fun, but a closer look reveals a two-way scrutiny session in which women evaluate one another based on looks, status, and feminine competency. Rush remains a daunting social obstacle wherever it's enacted, but nowhere are the expectations higher, the standards more stringent, or the consequences as crucial as in the American South, where many a feminine future still depends on a few days in autumn. As a laboratory of white Southern womanhood, sorority rush remains unsurpassed. The annual performance represents a pinnacle of sorts, an apex of feminine enactment with its own regional meanings, yardsticks, and habits. In a mere 5 days of careful choreography, time-honored gender standards are upheld and celebrated as intertwined ideas about family and femininity, race and place are mapped on the bodies of young women. As schools in other parts of the country have gradually adopted more relaxed rush procedures, featuring casual get-togethers, foreshortened rush schedules, and bidding practices geared more towards inclusion rather than exclusion, the large Southern schools have been slower to change, hanging on to old forms and arcane formalities. Social meanings about race and place, region and identity result from the process, and the Southern investment in keeping rush formal, or frilly as some of the clubs call it, signals widespread commitment to existing structures of privilege. Feminine performance remains the central production site of Region, with Sorority Rush the standout act. As Professor Jess Maddox observed, Bama Rush is about performing Southernness. Now, in the larger project, my book, which is available over here, I explore 3 rituals: Sorority Rush, the beauty pageant, and an Old South tourist production, the Confederate pageant of the Natchez Pilgrimage. All 3 feature a Southern beauty with distinctive traces of the lady and belle figures. My method is ethnographic, combining observation of these rituals as well as behind-the-scenes observation, plus taped interviews with participants. I read these against scholarship on public memory and commemoration, performance, and Southern and gender history. So I went into this project with questions about what these rituals accomplish beyond the obvious. You know, what sort of work is getting done in addition to selecting a new beauty queen or a new class of sorority members? And why do they look the way they do? Why are they so sort of extreme and precise? And what are they still doing here? In the end, I explore these rituals for the role they play in performing particular remembrances of the Southern past. I contend that the white Southern beauty has served as a key memory mechanism, producing Region and a nostalgic white Southernness. She is essentially embodied commemoration. It also seems that this cultural work has largely gone unnoticed, or at least unacknowledged. Remember, even as Confederate symbols, monuments, flags are retired from civic life, the Southern beauty carries on, performing white nostalgia. In fact, in the decades spanning the late 20th century and the early 21st, the Southern beauty seemed to be everywhere. She was central to traditions of hospitality, to the holiday dinners, tailgate parties, pilgrimage tours, and bridal teas, organized by women and designed to spotlight and uphold certain standards of white womanhood. The look of May Day celebrations, Southeastern Conference tailgating parties, and the Kentucky Derby, for example, were so easily called to mind because of the repeated patterned actions of white Southern women. The Southern beauty evoked the Southern lady and her junior counterpart, the Southern belle, and signaled them once more. From Carolina cotillions and azalea trail maids to campus competitions and society balls, young white women regularly demonstrated their ability to do white Southern womanhood convincingly and on cue. Now, the idea that the Southern beauty would escape notice is a bit ironic, in my opinion, considering that women and performance have always been key to white Southerners' understanding of themselves. Regional identity depends upon collective memory, and collective memory depends upon performance. And at the heart of Southern memory work, past and present, are women. Performance, in particular, facilitates remembering. In fact, memory studies scholars say that commemorative performance or ceremonies or productions are only as successful as they are performative. The conspicuous repetition of iconic gestures is a key to remembering in common. Women, meanwhile, have historically served as keepers of memory, while men gravitated to history, populating military roundtables and societies. Women coalesced around heritage and caring for the Southern past. Women tended to family memory. They organized the gatherings, the holiday celebrations, and family reunions, central to maintaining connection with each other and the past. And they ventured outside the household to assume leadership of activities that defined and protected the Southern past. You think about the United Daughters of the Confederacy, of course, erecting monuments, preserving historic sites, and creating heritage displays. White Southern women shaped and safeguarded what they considered the true history of the region. From the very start, white Southerners used spectacle and ritual to emphatically demonstrate who they were and who they were not. They were fond of thinking of themselves the merely relocated counterparts of European nobility, and they consequently emphasized high forms of pageantry. In May Day celebrations, jousting tournaments, Twelfth Night parties, and Mardi Gras balls, Southerners held up white Southern womanhood as their emblem of honor. This is a crowning in, I believe, 1925 in Washington, D.C. In the late 19th and early 20th century United States, similar impulses fueled the popularity of historical pageants, grand tableaux featuring large casts of everyday citizens acting out episodes of local or regional history. This is from, as you see, South Carolina, and if you can read the fine print, it says that there were, I believe, featuring 2,000 local citizens in their pageant. Women often appeared in cameo roles, featuring sweeping scenes of settlement, the Civil War, town founding, or industrialization. Pageants served to contain stresses on the social order and to instruct new immigrants in the morality, integrity, and work ethic necessary to civic cohesion. In the segregated South, few directors could resist the opportunity presented by historical pageants, the chance to re-script the Southern past. White Southerners produced pageants that expressed their anxiety over the state of society by acting out right versions of the past, essentially grand displays of consensus that reinforced the social order and asserted continuity with a harmonious plantation past where everybody got along, and it was just a big, happy plantation family. Oops, going a little too fast here. Such anti-modern, let me make sure I'm in the right place, yeah, all right. Such anti-modernism, rejecting the present in favor of a preferable mythical past, dominated Southern historical pageantry from the 1920s. This is from Alabama Homecoming Week, a pageant in 5 or 6, I believe. And each one of these contestants is a contestant for the spirit of the South. Women figured prominently in all the productions, but especially in allegorical tableau vivants, in which they were presented as the embodiment of various virtues. In between historical vignettes of women appeared symbolic dances as the spirit of progress or the spirit of history. And these contestants have similar sort of allegorical names. In one typical South Carolina pageant, the spirit of the antebellum South radiated all the feeling of the old-time South, its hospitality, its entertainment, its feudal protection. Another featured a reenactment of the inauguration of Jefferson Davis, as well as the spirit of the South sending chivalry off to war. In the end, the Southern historical pageant amounted to an elaborate spectacle of social position that distorted history in favor of an idealized version of the past. The backdrop for all of these productions was the myth of the lost cause. After the Civil War, white Southerners sought meaning in defeat and a way of imagining themselves a coherent community. So again, remembering in common as a way to form regional identity. They wanted to dignify the Confederate cause and provide meaning for its loss. The lost cause was most effective in ritual. Days of fasting and prayer, Confederate Memorial Day celebrations and reunions, funerals of wartime heroes, and Confederate monument dedications inspired mass outpourings of emotion. Here's one in Talladega, Alabama, from the Children of the Confederacy. These ritual displays typically climaxed with the presentation of a local maiden clad in virginal white, a living, breathing justification for why the South had gone to war. The denouement of the Lost Cause dates to about 1920, when the Confederate Memorial Movement erected its last monument, and the remaining Confederate veterans finally passed away. In the wake came a proliferation of activities that employed feminine performance to reiterate Southern whiteness. In fact, it was the very next year, 1921, that the Miss America pageant made its boardwalk debut. In the South, and this, of course, is Margaret Gorman, the first Miss America from Washington, D.C. I believe she was 15 years old, 15 or 16. In the South, in the following decades, a vibrant regional pageant system emerged that gave white Southerners a new site for celebrating and consecrating racial dominance. New spectacles also emerged in beauty pageants, agricultural festivals, sporting events, tourist productions, parades and fairs. White Southern women commanded the spotlight as symbols of regional pride. Corpus Christi, Texas, for example, refashioned what they called Splash Days, which was a simple beauty review that had begun in 1917, into a 3-day merchant-sponsored celebration dubbed Buccaneer Days after the city's swashbuckling past. By 1937, the winning contestant for Miss Buck Days reigned over a parade, an historical pageant, and a ball, and stood for everything best and brightest about the city, its hopes, its dreams, its heritage. Queen competitions at agricultural fairs in the 1930s used sex appeal to draw interest in surplus yields. Publicity photographs like this one for the Miss Chilton County Peach Festival pageant, and there were also calendars and all sorts of publicity photographs featured scantily clad contestants frolicking in the fields or caressing the crops. Draped in tobacco leaves, cloaked in cotton, or picking a peach, the Harvest Queen contestant embodied the land and its bounty. The Memphis Cotton Carnival, founded by business leaders in 1931 to promote the region's quote-unquote white gold, featured a cotton carnival queen who reigned over masked balls, float parades, and midway rides. But after early festivals either excluded Black people or featured them in demeaning roles, Black Memphians formed their own Cotton Makers Jubilee in 1935 that operated much the same as its white counterpart. The result was that each spring, Black and white Memphians staged a celebration of cotton that mirrored the region's stark racial divide, taking part in simultaneous but separate private events and in mass public events conducted according to the intricate but unwritten rules of segregation. Memphians performed choreography of Jim Crow with an archetypal Southern beauty at the center of the show. Across the South, it was much the same. Young white beauties served as centerpieces of leisure activities that celebrated and validated a distinctive, segregated way of life. The Southern beauty was the perfect emblem, both motif of place and its rationale. Tourist campaigns staged and sold a romanticized Old South. At the depths of the Depression, towns and cities touted the uncommon architectural, natural beauty, and above all, gracious hospitality awaiting them down south. On home and garden tours across the region, hosts in heirloom hoop skirts drove the popularity and profitability of a burgeoning pilgrimage movement that showcased a carefully curated Southern past. By mid-century, as segregation increasingly drew national opposition, obvious, predictable icons have become bankable memory mechanisms for tourists who were longing to feel Southern. Cypress Gardens in Central Florida, a tourist attraction known for its water skiing shows, installed Southern Belle hostesses at the gates in 1940, and they proved such a draw that the proprietors soon opened a Belle photography concession besides, so that visitors could don hoop skirts for keepsake portraits of themselves promenading amongst the flowers. Yeah, and of course, this is a famous marketing photo from the Natchez pilgrimage. By 1954, the year that the Miss America pageant was first televised, the South had a fully developed system of local pageants in place for feeding the national contest. It was also on the brink of perfecting another system, massive resistance to racial equality. The Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision that declared segregation unconstitutional the same year fueled both phenomena. A full century after her antebellum heyday, the Southern lady experienced perhaps her finest hour. Upheld once more as the reason behind, quote unquote, our Southern way of life, she remained a focal point for white Southerners' resistance to racial equality. If vocal and violent white defiance defined massive resistance, silent and serene defiance defined the passive resistance of the Southern beauty. And do we note, this is from the Wilmington Azalea Festival. Do we notice anybody in particular? That is the Gipper. And that's also extra points for any North Carolinians being able to identify. Third from right is Luther Hodges, who was a governor, and that's as far as I go. The rest, some of these people are Hollywood stars. University campuses, in particular, served as stages for gendered spectacles of white supremacy. Sorority rituals, beauty pageants, campus newspaper photo features, and annual sporting traditions repeatedly held up the Southern lady as a powerful sign. If 1954 was the year of Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark Supreme Court decision abolishing legal segregation, the years that followed were those of Mary Ann Mobley and Linda Lee Mead, sorority sisters at the University of Mississippi, and the state's back-to-back Miss Americas, who, with their deft passing of the national beauty torch, drew attention to the campus and the state as strongholds of white Southern womanhood. There they are. Yeah. With faux plantation houses as backdrops, collegians regularly incorporated blackface spoofs into their campus parties and traditions. Blackface plantation parties, sharecroppers' balls, and slave auctions were common amusements, with talent shows, Greek Week, Dixie Week, and Old South, all opportunities for blacking up. At mid-century, the stance of white campus culture was unmistakable. White Southern collegians supported white supremacy and would use their campus productions to construct and preserve it. So you can see that this issue, and these couple of blackface images are both from the University of Alabama in 1955 from their campus annual yearbook. But this was a common practice across the South. It was not, blackface was not limited to young men. And this, again, the contrast that is attempted in these productions of showing who you are and who you are not, you couldn't get any more, sorry, I'm going too fast here. But from this to this, and from this to this, Aunt Jemima's Pancake School. What a riot, right? In the 1970s, this racism goes underground. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 signaled the beginning of the end of blatant expressions of racial hatred, but racist attitudes and beliefs did not disappear But in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they went steadily underground. This was when the racist theme parties flourished in Greek life. They went underground, but they were still around. And again, this attempt to establish your racial stance. At the same time, beauty pageants, so this was sort of going on underground, but the racism was still there. At the same time, beauty pageants proliferated, and Southern contestants continued to dominate the Miss America system. This is from Miss New Orleans, I believe it's 1998. As they struggled to acclimate to a changing larger society, white Southerners met iconic performances of Southern beauty with enthusiasm and fondness. In the absence of code words and incendiary symbols, the Southern beauty stepped in at festivals, parades, broadcasts, and sporting events to convey unobjectionable but unmistakable messages of race and region. The Southern beauty continued to perform white Southernness. This is from the, I think it's 2010, it's in my book. This is the Shrimp and Petroleum Festival in Louisiana. And I kind of love this image, and also one of the earlier ones of the crowd because all the girls' names start with K. We have Kayla and Kaylee and Kaylin, and it was a real thing. Yeah. In 1921, Michaela Culpepper was the it girl of Bama Rush. This is actually not Michaela. This is suggests maybe her situation, but this is a picture from University of Georgia Rush in 2017. But Michaela Culpepper was the it girl of Bama Rush in 2021. She had become a TikTok favorite, but she was cut out of Rush. This happened after she disclosed late in the process that she is mixed race. Yeah, and so I'd like to close, just leave you there with that image of this lone person of color in this predominantly white sorority, and read a passage to you from my book that is taken from that, interpreting that moment when sororities are having to sort of grapple with the prospect of becoming more inclusive. Let me just take a sip of water. And then we'll open the floor for questions. This is an excerpt from my chapter called Sister Act. The comforting insularity of the mainline Southern sorority house was disrupted by the dark Rushie on the doorstep. Even at the dawn of the 21st century, the African-American hopeful threatened the premise and the promise of sorority membership as white Southerners had long understood them. Anticipations of a golden time of race and class privilege received in exchange for performing revered renditions of white womanhood were shattered by the worthy black candidate waiting just outside. With natural race difference exposed as false, the pact of securing social position through gendered rituals of exclusion was suddenly absurd. The black Rushie at the door was literally, historically, and imaginatively upsetting, a living, breathing invalidation of certain long-held understandings of white Southernness. Sororities consequently reacted with defensive regret, falling back on age-old platitudes about freedom of association. For many years, this approach had worked. White Southern sororities remained segregated decades after the desegregation of Southern universities, and indeed Southern fraternities. Adamant that desegregation not be forced on them, sororities had maintained a passive approach to widening the pool of rush registrants, most never moving beyond the informational pamphlet that universities bulk mailed to all female students. Everyone has always been given the opportunity, officials sighed, echoing the same lame lament long offered to explain workplace hiring inequities of every sort. But where equal opportunity law spelled out the fact that it was not enough to crack open the gates of access, active recruitment and mentoring were required to address entrenched patterns of discrimination. Sororities preserved the status quo and expressed few qualms about their racial makeup. Members were quick and vocal about espousing ideals of diversity, but slow and vague about their responsibility and action plans for realizing such goals. Compelled to contemplate radical change, actives dissembled, their imaginations seemingly immobilized, as if they literally could not conceive of social equality in place of the privilege they had all but convinced themselves was the product of healthy competition and personal choice. Deflecting their gaze from the structures of unearned favor that benefited them, sorority members engaged in not seeing and not knowing, in the blissful ignorance that was the bargain of privilege. Where less is spoken, more is performed. Faced with the unthinkable, sororities fell back on manners. The same precision performance and exacting evaluation of etiquette that had produced these strongholds of privilege, of advantage, also protected them. African American students rushing traditionally white Southern sororities experienced the same polished welcome and rapt attention of everyone else, and so they were baffled as well as disappointed when they were abruptly cut from every house in the second or third round. When Melody Twilley was denied a bid at the University of Alabama in the year 2000, and again in 2001, she was initially flabbergasted. Bright, attractive, upper middle class, and a native Alabamian, she was just like the other rushies. Only her race set her apart. At Skit, I only went to one house, Twilley told reporters, but I felt so at home in that house. This is elite ritual practice, explained anthropologist Susan Harding of Rush. It's tacky to be verbally racist, but perfectly acceptable to discriminate through your behavior, through your choices. Elite racism is implicit, acted out, behaved, not expressed in language. Thank you. Here's where you can find me if you want to stay in touch. I'm also on Threads now. What a chore, staying up on all that stuff. Yeah, let me take a sip, and I think Chris is going to MC some questions.
I'm really interested in the inversions, the blackface, and I was just
I'm
wondering.
sorry, who's speaking? I can't see. Oh, hi, yeah.
Hi, the inversions and the blackface, the cultural inversions, but I really, after hearing everything, more interested in how you came to want to study this and if you had some skin in the game or something.
Oh, what a great turn of phrase. Woo. As was mentioned, I grew up in Jackson. I'm a thorough product of this culture, and went to Texas for my undergraduate degree, which has its own aesthetic. I'll leave that right there. And came back to study for my master's degree in Southern Studies at the University of Mississippi, and was sort of, I don't know what I was thinking, but it was sort of felt like I was hit with this wall of femininity, of this particular, really precise, of course it was Ole Miss. And at the time also, Southern Studies scholars and others were starting to talk about and explore regional identity and why. And so I was sort of, well, why is it coded white? Why is it so segregated, essentially? Why, which is sort of absurd on its face if you know our history. Why would this idea that Southern identity is white? How does that get produced and reproduced? And I kept thinking that there was more going on to these. People were so intense and so invested in these productions and being able to do this right version of woman. And there are lots of social rewards for doing it too. But I thought, well, there's got to be more going on here than just choosing a new class of sorority members. And so I started to explore. I didn't really know what my thesis was at that point, but I wanted to do a lot of interviews with the young women because I thought it would be easy for me to, step back from a distance and watch these rituals playing out on the Southern landscape and have some dismissive interpretation of them. I thought that's not really going to tell me what their experience is. And so that's how I decided to do this very unwieldy research model of both the ethnographic observation and the interviews. But yeah, that's where it came from. Yes. I think we have it right here.
I would like to say that I am very fascinated by this research and very fascinated by this topic. So my question is, in conducting this research, have you came across like any interaction or like the dynamic between white pageants and white sororities with Divine Nine sororities or black pageants?
Well, there's great research done on the Divine Nine, and there's some great books about the kind of questions you're talking about. But my question really had to do with whiteness and white women and their participation and sort of crucial participation in maintaining that idea. So in the sense that, so no, on the Divine Nine, that really wasn't going to answer my overriding questions. But of course, inevitably, I did sort of cover this moment of where the mainline white sororities had to deal with the prospect of desegregation, which is by no means accomplished, even if there's a couple of, members in different chapters. So there's still lots of work to be done. I hope people will do it.
Hi, my daughter went to Ole Miss and graduated not a couple of years ago. And what I experienced there was that fraternities membership seemed to be about the same as it's always been, maybe grew a little bit over the years with the size of the university, but that sororities were expanding,
burgeoning.
like double and triple the size. They were, most all of them torn down the old houses and built houses, 2 or 3 times the size they used to be. And they've, imposed rules that you have to accept so many members and that sort of thing. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I haven't focused on fraternities. Sororities are a full shift. But I don't know exactly. I know that there are more women students than there are male students. Does anybody else have? Betty?
I have a comment to that.
Betty Jo.
What we're seeing now is the baby boomer generation, white women who did sorority, now their children are becoming age appropriate for Rush and their legacies. So what we're seeing, like in Baton Rouge a few years ago, the Chi Omega chapter was taking, 100 girls. They had about 80 legacies that they were forced to take. So that only left 20 spots. So what they're doing is they're getting bigger classes to accommodate.
Yeah, but isn't that my understanding is that the different organizations have different practices about drawing up their bid lists, and that in some cases, they could fill their entire class with legacies, but they don't, because they want some of these other high-profile, the it girls of sorority rush. So that may vary from campus to campus, but yeah, I mean, there is that, and there again, that issue of legacy, of lineage, of family expectations. It's much more focused on the young women than on the young men. Nobody cares what fraternity the men are in, I don't think.
So I also went to the University of Mississippi, and I was wondering if you could speak on the social capital that's gained once in the sorority with like the alumni and that type of network and resources.
Well, I'm not a member, so I would not be, I have my own outlook on that. Certainly that is, there's a networking as sort of professional networking is presented as a perk of sorority life. I don't think, from what I've seen, that is the overriding impetus for going through this extremely competitive process. I think it's much more social. Actual members will probably have a better answer for that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Circling back to his question about how many people are accepted in each sorority and how those quotas are capped, at least at Tulane University, the number that was required to be taken by each sorority every year would change depending on how many people were going through recruitment. So they looked at that, and then Pan-Hell as a whole had some equation that they would calculate how many girls that each sorority would need to take, and each sorority would cap their group based off of that. So sometimes a sorority would take maybe 20 more than another sorority, but usually everyone would take within 10 of the same number. But people were still cut throughout the process regardless, but there was a minimum number that needed to be met based on how many people overall were going
Yeah, so
through.
the national, it's all about growth. The national wants you to grow a little every year, because otherwise, if you get to where you're in declining numbers, then you're no longer desirable. It's harder to pledge people. Nobody wants you. But it's a little bit like college admissions yield, too, right? Where you're trying to guess your numbers of how many people will actually accept your offer of admission. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation, by the way. It was
Thank you.
really, really good. One thing that you spoke about that was really interesting to me was like how these women were really in the male gaze of like having the sex appeal and the femininity and the softness that's required to be like a woman in the South. And it sort of made me think about, is it fair to say there's an overlap between not only like the male gaze, but like the female gaze also of like being feminine and soft and pretty, sort of like that, those two structures. being placed on women.
The male gaze is definitely the overriding factor here. In a lot of the houses, if any of you actually watched the documentary currently out that I appear in, Bama Rush, they say that the fraternity men are the ones who determine which are the top houses, which has the hottest girls. So, but in the process, the women of these organizations are doing the work for the men, right? They are policing other women with their standards, with their rules, with their fines, with their fees, with their rules about not going out of the house without 2 out of 3 being done, your hair, your makeup, or your dress. I think I got that right. What if I don't have any shoes on? I feel like I would have been the worst pledge. So there really is it's women doing the work of patriarchy, frankly. And it's not feminist. There's very little, now, and this is a difference between many of the white mainline sororities and the Divine Nine, because the Divine Nine are much more focused on community service throughout your life, whereas I don't see, besides some reunions and some social activities like football games and things like that, so much emphasis on community uplift or service it's much more focused, the white sororities, on the 4 years of college. We hope it's 4. As a parent, 4 years. Okay, I know some people take longer. Does that answer your question? That's my opinion after doing all this research.
Is it okay if I comment off of that really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I'm an active in a sorority at the University of Mississippi.
Okay.
And at least in my experience, the way the ideas of a top house works isn't necessarily like what the guys think, but rather it's during the recruitment process, how hard is this house to get into? Because the idea of a top house isn't who has the hottest girls, it's that house is going to be harder to get into than a house that would be
So there's an
bottom
exclusivity
tier.
factor.
There's an exclusivity
Right,
factor.
and it also has to do with grades, for sure. There's like a
Yes.
minimum cutoff with your GPA and all of that, right?
Yes.
And your record of community service. What I'm talking about is comparing the Divine Nine and which I'm not even sure I'm prepared to do, but I'm not saying that there's no expectation of community service, just that the focus of the groups themselves during college, that's not the big focus. Yes, they all have a philanthropy. They officially have a philanthropy. And that, honestly, was the philanthropy round. That's a relatively new animal. When did that come into being? About 20 years ago? It sort of reminds me of platforms in pageants, which were also developed in relatively recently in the history of beauty pageants, kind of giving that veneer of purpose, right? Yes.
So much is going through my mind. I am a child of Vicksburg in the 1950s. And your images evoke a response from me, having grown up with the bouncing, swinging blonde ponytail and the flat behinds.
I can
You are
just see it.
correct. The Divine Nine is more concerned with service because the nature of the society says that that's what we needed to do. We don't have the luxury of flitting around for 4 years looking for a husband, although some of us did that. Full disclosure, I'm
We're
not a-
necessarily speaking in generalities. That's right.
Full disclosure, I am not a member of the Divine Nine.
Okay.
And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's black fraternities and sororities. And the female preeminent society, sorority, and don't stone me if you disagree,
Oh, no.
are the members of Delta. And the AKAs
Somehow I
come
knew you were
after
going to
that.
say that.
It's the truth. And actually, it depends on the campus that you study on.
That's right.
My question is, your images of what's bad about this whole craziness, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, the only positive image we get from Mississippi, and we get no bad images from Mississippi, the only positive image we get from Mississippi are Marianne Mobley and Linda Lee Mead. Full confession, I loved Marianne Mobley. And everybody loved Marianne
Well, yeah,
Mobley.
what's not to, she's hugely likable.
She was the first. And I don't know if you know this, but when she was crowned Miss America, people in the black community said, she's black. She was too pretty. Remember those bouncing ponytails and those flat behinds? We claimed Marianne Mobley. But why were you not able to find any bad images from the University of Mississippi? Because they also did blackface and
Oh,
more.
of course. Yeah, I just didn't. Image research is time-consuming and expensive, and I actually found incredible blackface image from Mississippi of an entire stage full of the Gamma Delta fraternity, which is a sorority. That's their incorporated name. All in blackface, on the stage of Fulton Chapel they were pretending to be a jazz band, and there were like 54 of them. But the composition of the image was not very interesting. It was sort of from the side, and I just made a decision that wasn't really the best, most compelling image to use. There's lots to use, and I had a difficult time choosing. There were also on game days, there are pictures from, if you look at the annuals of any of the large southern schools, it's full of blackface images. There were, people would put cardboard, these giant sort of greeting cards on the lawns of the fraternity and sorority houses, and a lot of those were, Black Sambo, and we're going to beat the Bengals to butter at Ole Miss. So there were plenty, and there are some, I think there's some others. I didn't include this in the book, that image I showed of on the football field of homecoming with the Confederate getup, and that was rife. But I had to pick and choose. My publisher was very generous, and I have 36 images in the book, but I think I was supposed to have 35, so I was already over the limit. Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to say something because I'm a member of Divine Nine. So you're correct in the fact that they look at community service hard. Because when I was going through my process, I did grad chapter, but they do it in undergrad too. You have to complete maybe over 100 hours of community service just to be
Just
considered.
to apply. Mm-hmm.
And before you go in, you need to have community service hours, and also when you're going through the process, you got to do community service. Then afterwards, you're required to do a certain amount of community service. So it's very much it's very correct, and it also depends on the sorority or the fraternity. Because pretty much almost everybody in my family that's my age is in Divine Nine. My brother is an Alpha. My cousin is a Kappa. Got 2 cousins that are AKAs. I'm a Sigma Gamma Rho. Got another cousin that's Sigma. So we all went through that process, and it's very much, you see, like almost everywhere you see us and hear about us doing community service, because I get emails almost every day about another thing going on, so.
And isn't there also in that system, there is also some competitive femininity of different persuasions between the different clubs, is that correct?
Yeah.
But that's for another scholar to investigate.
I will say, AKAs have the reputation for being more, I don't want to say it in offend AKA conceited, and being like the pretty girls, like the top tier pretty girls.
And is there some colorism?
Yes.
Okay, so, yeah.
Before they had the whole, like, brown bag.
The brown bag
princess.
test, yeah.
So, yeah, there's not, I'm not saying, I don't know a lot going on right now, but is there any in there? Probably. But in my sorority, I haven't seen it.
So there is exclusion even among African American.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's the key word for today, exclusion. I think we got 1 minute, Chris.
Yeah, just a quick comment. In the summer of 1971, it was right after I graduated from high school, I worked for the state capitol grounds crew. And in the state capitol building at that time, I guess it was the second floor, in one alcove they had a picture of Linda Lee Mead, and in another they had Mary Ann Motley. That was part of the decor of the capitol building. But a year later, there was a different governor, and those photos were gone. So you do see a change of focus in that. But I was just going to make that as a comment.
Thank you.
One last question for you here.
Thank you. I went to the University of Wyoming, and the year that I was there were only 3 other black girls at the school. but for some reason, that I was invited to join a sorority. And I was not interested, because I was afraid of being used as a target for some amusement or whatever else might come up. But the big question that bothers me is why would people do the blackface thing? What is it all about? What kind of psychological thing that gives them satisfaction for playing that? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's really a sad history, isn't it? I come back to fear. White Southerners were terrified of losing their segregated, unearned privilege way of life. And they didn't react well when it did happen, when we had the official desegregation laws passed. But in the years building up to it, this fear and this anxiety, this sort of white anxiety, gets produced, regularly and large and in your face on these college campuses, as well as elsewhere. Talked about tourist productions, but this was so. Instead of in the book, I talk about this sort of the serene Southern beauty is this motif of the white South, and she's that passive resistance that's the counterpart to the dogs and fire hoses and really loud and angry violence of massive resistance. Yeah, it was very popular.
Thank you all for being here today. We have copies of Beth's book for sale over here, and if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, sorry, we ran out of time on that. She'd be glad, I'll bet, to answer it over here. Come back tomorrow if you can for the gallery talk. Come back next Wednesday for History's Lunch when Heather Denny will talk about longtime Jackson State President Jacob L. Reddix and the legacy that he left. But for now, help me thank Beth Boyd for this program today.
Thank you very much.